بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم صدق الله العلي العظيم. One of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam had requested from Rasulullah that after he passed away, that Rasulullah should be in charge of distributing his wealth. This man had tons of dates that he wanted to be distributed among the poor, among the needy, and among the general Muslim population. So after he passed away, the Prophet took it upon himself to fulfill this responsibility. So he began dividing the dates, he began passing them out until he was done. When the Prophet was leaving, he found one small date which was on the floor and it was kicked into the dust. So the Prophet looked at this piece of date and he turned to his companions. And he said that had this man had donated himself in his lifetime this small date or this amount, he would have received the thawab, he would have received the reward of what he donated after his life, everything that I just divided among the people, just by donating this small amount in his whole life. This story teaches us many lessons. First of all, that what is wanted from us is the quality, not the quantity of our deeds. The quality takes precedence and priority over the quantity. How much we have to offer is not as important as what we have to offer, the value. That's one thing. Another is that this world is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the chance to shine, to prove our true selves. Because once you get to that world, there's no going back. There's no coming back. You cannot fix what was wrong, and you cannot add more to what was right. Today, you find a growing trend among philanthropists, people who donate the bulk of their wealth to charitable organizations. What they do is they commit that most of their wealth, however much it is, billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, once they pass away, they say that that's not going to go to our children, it's going to go to charitable foundations. It's a growing trend. A lot of people are beginning to do this. And even the other day they were saying the founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, he joined the list of people who said that after he dies, his wealth is going to go to charitable foundations. Of course, the most generous today, they say the most generous philanthropist in the world is Bill Gates. And the most generous foundation is the foundation which he set up, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But it's become a growing trend among these billionaires to bequeath all of their wealth, or most of their wealth, after they die, to charitable organizations. But the true test that Islam tests us with is giving that wealth today, while you have the chance. Not all of it, but as much as you can. لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. The Quran tells us that you will not reach benevolence, greatness, until you give from that which you love. Not how much, but that which you love, meaning the highest quality. When you give to the poor, you don't give your leftover clothes, your extra clothes. That's good. That's good in itself. It's very benevolent, and you'll be rewarded. But the test is when you go and get your favorite article of clothing, which you're saving for a special occasion, and you give that to the poor. That's a true test. And when we look to the verses of the Quran, who better than to implement them than Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam? Fatima al-Zahra alayhi as-salam, she, on the night of her wedding, and of course the Prophet did not have much to offer. Amir al-Mu'mineen himself had nothing to offer. In terms of finance, in terms of wealth, he had nothing to offer. But he had everything to offer in terms of, spiritually taking care of her and ensuring her well-being. No one was a match for her except for Amir al-Mu'mineen. He had nothing to offer, so the Prophet had prepared for her a dress that she was to wear. So a woman comes to the door of Fatima al-Zahra, a poor woman, she knocks her door. Fatima al-Zahra opens the door. This woman asks for sustenance, for something to survive off of. So she goes and gets her dress before her wedding and she gives it to this woman. She gives it as a donation, as charity. So when the Prophet requests for her to go and prepare herself for the wedding and to wear the dress, she turns to him and she tells him that a poor woman came to my door today and I had no money to offer her. I gave her my dress, the one that you had prepared for me. And she speaks this ayah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You shall not achieve greatness until you give that which you love, something that you value a lot. Now ask any woman to give her wedding dress or her diamond ring, which she loves, to someone who is poor. That usually does not happen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compensated her with a dress from heaven, and that's what the Prophet ordered her to wear. The point is to give that which you love. I read a report a while back, a couple of years ago, that said that one of the princes from the royalty from one of the Middle Eastern countries, when he was passing away, when he was dying, and this isn't a verified report, but it's not very far from the truth, and I'll tell you why. That the final months of his life, or the final weeks of his life, he spent dividing his wealth among his children and his grandchildren and his family members. And they said that his wealth was estimated at $280 billion. Not 280 million, $280 billion. Why? Because he knew that that's it. There's only a few more days left. The doctors had told him, you have a couple of months left, a couple of weeks left. That's when he started to spend the $280 billion. Now you might think the richest person in the world only has 50 or 60 billion dollars. Those lists that we read, the Forbes list of, the 100 or 1,000 richest people, guess what? Those are only the official richest people, like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Carlos Slim and these people. Their money is taken from legitimate sources, from their companies, from their businesses. They fall under that list. But there are many more people who exist today in the world who have their finances from not so legitimate means, and they surpass by far the legitimate billionaires. So it's not too far from the truth. But what would you do with $280 billion? $1 billion, 500 million, 10 million is more than enough for a person to live comfortably for his entire life. So the point is giving your wealth before that final hour, or giving your wealth before you die. That's the whole point. Islam tells us to give, and it tells us how to give. And Islam tells us that the more you give, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless you in your life. The more He will lengthen your life. For instance, one thing which a lot of people overlook is giving charity, giving sadaqah. Do you know the benefits of giving sadaqah, charity? Numerous ahadith say that if a person just gives a basic charity, basic sadaqah, that will protect him for the rest of the day. Try it. Try it today. Charity doesn't mean you give $100 or $200 or $300 a day. Even if you give 1 cent, 1 penny a day, 5 pennies, 10 pennies a day, that's considered charity. The ahadith says that in that case, God will protect that person. And over time, it will build. that increases value, that gives value to our life. Now when we ask the question, if a person does good and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses him with a long life, well, how is it that some people, they do good in their lives, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still cuts their life short? Why is it that some people do good and they live long, and some people do good but they live short? Why does that happen? Why is it not that the evil people are punished? Well, there are many reasons for that. First of all, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at the quality of our deeds. See, anytime you look at a deed, anytime you look at something great, there are different points of view. There's a point of view which you have, and you see it from the outside. The only person who knows the reality behind every deed, behind every act, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at the quality of a deed and not the quantity. Look at our ahadith. The hadith says that if a person offers 2 units of prayer with sincerity, that's greater than an entire night of worship. An entire night of worship. Another hadith says that if a person offers 2 units of prayer properly, then Allah will forgive every single one of his sins. Every one of his bad deeds. His slate will be wiped clean. Yes, truly. Now, what kind of prayer is that? That's a different story. One of the companions of our 6th Imam, Al-Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he has a conversation with the Imam. So the Imam turns to him and he asks him a question. He says, Ya hada, he brings his name. He says, Atuhsinu salatuk? He says, how is your prayer? Do you offer a proper prayer? So the companion turns to the 6th Imam. He says, Yabna Rasulullah, what kind of question is this? He says, I have memorized the book of Hariz concerning prayer. Now remember, before, they did not have the same compilation of ahadith which we have today. Today we have Bihar al-Anwar, we have Wasa'il al-Shi'a. These did not exist during the times of the Imams. What happened was the companions of the Imams, each one of them would write their own book of hadith which they heard from the Imam. And after a while, the most important books were referred to as Al-Usul al-Arba'mi'ah. 400 of the most important books written by noble companions, ahadith which they had heard from the Imams of Ahlul Bayt themselves. And then they compiled these later on into the books of hadith, Al-Kafi, Man la yahdaruhu al-Faqih, Al-Tahdib, Al-Istibsar, and other books which came after. Hariz was one of the companions who had written a book full of ahadith which he had heard from the Imams of Ahlul Bayt concerning salah. So if anybody wanted to learn about the rules regarding salah, the rules regarding prayer, they would look to the book of Hariz. So this companion tells the Imam, after the Imam asks him, how do you offer your prayers? He says, I've memorized the book of Hariz. Meaning what? Meaning I'm an expert in prayer. So the Imam tells him, then prove yourself. So he stands up and he prays. He offers 2 units of prayer in front of the Imam. The Imam looks to him and he tells him the following. He says, what a shame that a person lives for 60. He doesn't say a person, he says one of you, meaning one of our followers, lives for 60 or 70 years and does not pray one prayer properly. What does that mean? That this was the companion. This was the companion of the 6th Imam. He was basically an expert on prayer because he had memorized the book of Hariz. But in the eyes of the Imam, he had not done it properly. Not that Allah did not accept his prayer, but the Imam was speaking of the form of prayer which is the kind that erases all of your sins. So that kind of prayer. And then what happened was the Imam continues and the Imam tells him, let me pray in front of you and I will show you how to pray. So the Imam, he gets up and offers 2 units of prayer. The hadith is very long, but it mentions exactly how a person should pray. So don't think that, I'm praying correctly. Even learned scholars constantly remind themselves of the rules regarding prayer. Just because you learned to pray once when you were a child does not ensure or guarantee that you're going to know every rule of prayer throughout the rest of your life. There's no embarrassment in asking your father or your mother or somebody knowledgeable, well, am I doing this correctly? Am I performing wudu correctly? Am I praying correctly? I'll give you just one example. When the Imam stood to pray in front of the man, do you know what he did? Usually when we stand, our feet are not facing the Qibla. One is facing this way and the other that way. Normally this is how human beings stand. When you stand, your feet don't stand in the direction in front of you. Usually they stand a little bit, one to the right and the other to the left. The hadith, this man describes the prayer of the sixth Imam. He said that even his feet were pointing straight towards the Qibla. What does that mean? The Imam is trying to show him that every single part of my body is towards the Qibla, is towards the direction. So don't say that, I prayed, I was taught to pray at a younger age and now I know how to pray and I'm going to know how I'm secure for the rest of my life. There's no embarrassment in asking someone, how do I perform wudu properly? How do I perform prayer properly? What is embarrassing is that a person gets to the age of 40 or 50 or 60 and then he has to learn the hard way that I have not prayed a single prayer in my life correctly. So going back to the point that it's not about the quantity, the quality. This is the kind of prayer that we try to achieve. The prayer that is worth more than a whole night of worship. Or a prayer that has the ability to wipe out our sins. Even when it comes to our fasting. It is mentioned, narrated in the hadith that when it came to fasting, nobody fasted like Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. His fasting was on a completely different level. It wasn't about the times he fasted. Yes, the Imam and all the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they were known to fast throughout Ramadan and of course Sha'ban and Rajab as well. Okay, but it wasn't about the number, it was about the quality. They come to the Imam one day and he was injured in battle. And he was injured in his foot. He had a piece of an arrow stuck into his foot, Amir al-Mu'mineen. So they couldn't pull it out. It was too excruciating. Every time they wanted to pull it out, it was very painful. So they didn't know what to do and it couldn't stay in there. So his son suggested that when he is standing in prayer, go and take it out. Extract it from his foot while he's standing in prayer. Why? Because when Ali ibn Abi Talib is in prayer, he's in a whole different world. He's in a whole different dimension. And that's what they did. And they took it out without him even feeling it. No pain, nothing at all. This is the kind of prayer that we try to strive for. Quality and not quantity. So looking at the deeds that a person offers and the effect that it has on the length of his life, the first answer is this, is that just because a person does good or it looks like he does good does not mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him life. Because you don't know. Maybe those deeds are high in number, but not high in quality. That's number one. Number two is that you look at this life and truly, truly, this life is a prison for a believer. The hadith says that 40 days does not pass and a believer is struck with calamity. Or he is tested in some sort of way. 40 days, every 40 days. That's a test. That's a litmus test. You can ask yourself, does 40 days pass? If 40 days passes and God hasn't tested you with something, then you should go and review your belief. See if you're a true believer, and maybe you need to strengthen your faith so that God can test you. It truly is a prison. Death sometimes is freedom. Death is freedom from that prison. Personally, I know of a man, a scholar, who passed away 5 years ago. You know him as well. Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Rida Shirazi. I had the honor of being among them. I won't refer to myself as his student because I am less than his student. But I had the honor of living among this man and seeing his ways. And for those who knew him, when he passed away, his passing away came as a shock to everybody because this man was very great. Anybody who met him, if you ask anybody who met him, nobody had something negative to say about him. Nobody had anything negative to say about this man. And it came as a shock to us, the people who loved him. And And when he passed away, he was less than 50 years old. And as a person who lived among him, I can recall right now, we can come up with, we can keep asking God, well, why does God, shorten the life of somebody like this? Somebody who never took but always gave. This was one of the attributes of this man. He never took anything from anyone, and he always had something to give. And then I realized that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took his life, that was freedom for him. Such a great man. Because this world was nothing but torture. For men of God, this world is nothing but torture. And this is what the Quran tells us. Look at the story of Yusuf. Yusuf, ala nabina wa ala alihi afdalus salatu wassalam, was taken from his family. He was taken from his loving father out of jealousy. His brothers were jealous. They threw him in the well, and they took him out of the well, and they took him to Egypt. They purchased him as a slave, and they took him to Egypt. You know the story of what happened with the wife of the minister, the Aziz, when she tried to seduce him, and they wanted to throw him in jail, but they gave him an option of, cooperating with them and cooperating with the whole case, and basically abandoning the path of truth and justice, and abandoning the path of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered him to do. What does he say? قَالَ رَبِّ السِّجْنُ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا يَدْعُونَنِي إِلَيْهِ. That, oh Lord, if my freedom from these accusations, if my freedom was evil, if my freedom from evil, if your plan is to place me in prison, then I shall do so. And I'll stay in prison. I would rather favor prison, jail, than fall into the hands of these evil people. And he says, فَاسْتَجَابَ لَهُ رَبُّهُ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered his prayer. And he placed him in prison. And even when they wanted to take him out of prison, what happened? He refused. He said, I'm not going to leave prison until you offer me an answer as to why this charge was placed on me false. Because the wife of the Aziz, the minister, had said that he was the one who came after me. He wanted to commit adultery with me. And in order to run away from that, the conviction, he said, oh Lord, place me in prison, if that's what it takes. And he was placed in prison. Even when he wanted to leave, he said, no, I will not leave prison until somebody offers me an explanation as to what happened. And after that, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do for him? As a reward and as compensation, what did he do? He made him the king, and even he made him a minister in charge of the economy of the entire nation. And even when he became that, it was still a prison from him because he was away from his father. He was never happy because he was taken away from his father unjustly. So when we ask, well, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take the life of some people even though they do good in this world? That's the exact reason why. Some people, when God sees them doing great, He takes them so that there not be even the slightest chance of them abandoning the path of truth. The story tells us that there was an abbot, a worshipper, among Bani Israel. And this man, for years, was a worshipper. He was a wise man, and they would seek advice from him. A group of people, a group of brothers, they came and they brought their sister to him, and she was sick. And they placed their sister in his care. This was a very wise man. He was a worshipper, abid, those people who exclude themselves, they place themselves away from society to dedicate their lives to worshiping Allah. And what happened? What happened? The shaitan came and he tricked him, and she was in his care, and he committed adultery. So what happened? The shaitan came to him again, after he had done it. And in order to cover up his crime, what did he do? He murdered her, and he buried her in an unknown location. So when they came asking for her, for their sister, well, he couldn't offer them an explanation. They found her corpse. So what did they do? They brought him back for justice. So the shaitan came to him twice. Once to do the evil deed, and the second to kill her. And as they were bringing him up the steps in order to execute him, the shaitan came to him one more time. And he told him, I can free you from all of your misery, from what's about to happen. Bow down to me. Admit that I am your Lord. Worship me. And this man, he thought he had nothing else but the hope that the shaitan had promised him. That's what he did. And he fell. He fell into the trap of shaitan. For years he was a worshipper. What does that tell you? That tells you that probably the quality of his deeds was not as great as the quantity of his deeds. And that's exactly the case with the shaitan himself. For years, that hadith tells us, for hundreds of years or for thousands of years, he worshipped none but Allah. And through his worship, he permeated through the ranks of the angels and the jinn. He was considered one of the top jinn, one of the top angels, one of the top servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what did that matter? What did that matter? So the focus is more on the quality and not on the quantity. And lastly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed it in our hands. He has told us that there are some deeds which will lengthen our lives, and some deeds which will take away from our lives. Those deeds which take away from a person's life is, one is false witnessing, shahadat az-zur. If a person was to testify in falsehood rather than truth, that takes away from his life. Another is if a person was to sever his ties with his family members. That also calls for shortening the duration of a person's life. Whereas when you establish your relationship with your family members, that lengthens your life. And I'll give you one example and I'll end with this. Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, one of the companions, one of the great companions of the Prophet and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. This man, his father Abdullah al-Ansari, fought alongside the Prophet and he died. And this man had many siblings, sisters. And it is said that one day during the life of the Prophet, this young man, he fell ill. And his job after the death of his father, after the martyrdom of his father, was to take care of his sisters, was to take care of his siblings. So one day he was on his deathbed, and the Prophet came to him, and he placed upon him the responsibility of taking care of his sisters. And he was deciding how much should go to his siblings, his sisters, after he passes away. The Prophet came into him and he told him, whatever you had decided before, double that or triple that. So the Prophet's telling him, take care of them. And this is why the verse was revealed in the Quran, the last ayah of Surah An-Nisa, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, يَسْتَفْتُونَكَ قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ فِي الْكَلَالَةِ. It said that it was revealed in favor of Jabir ibn Abdullah, where he speaks of the inheritance of the siblings. If a person passes away and his father or mother aren't there, he doesn't have family members, a wife or children, but he has siblings, how much shall go to them? What he said, Jabir ibn Abdullah, that Rasulullah, because he gave me advice to take care of my family, that lengthened my life. And he was on his deathbed. And imagine, this was during the time of the Prophet. God saved his life. He outlived the Prophet. He outlived Imam Ali alayhi salam, and Al-Imam al-Hasan, and Al-Imam al-Hussein, and Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin, and according to some, he outlived Al-Imam al-Baqir. Imagine. And by the time it was after the time of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, during the days of Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin, it had said that he had reached such an old age that he had lost his sight. And of course the story is narrated on the Arba'in when he hears the voice of the fourth Imam and he recognizes him. When we narrate Hadith al-Kisa, how do we narrate it? An Jabir, the fifth Imam narrates it, An Jabir an Fatimah alayhi salam. So the fifth Imam narrates it from Jabir ibn Abdullah, who heard it directly from Fatimah Zahra alayhi salam. Imagine what a long, blessed life. And he admits He says that God prolonged my life. I was on my deathbed. I was about to die. And God prolonged my life. Why? Because I took care of my sisters. Because I took care of my siblings. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does this. He says that if you take care of your family members, you establish regular ties with them, He will prolong your life. And that's one of the things which adds to the quality and not the quantity. Taking care of your family members, your parents when they get to an old age, your brothers and sisters if they need you financially. So let us ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lengthen our lives and to allow us, especially in this month, to add more quality to our deeds and not necessarily quantity to our deeds. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات إنك على كل شيء قدير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين
اللهم صل على محمد